The paper snowflakes that follow have pictures cut into them, illustrating the story of the Garden of Eden, found in the 2nd and 3rd chapters in the book of Genesis in the Bible. It was written in Hebrew, and in Hebrew the word Eden means pleasure. So the Garden of Eden is the garden of pleasure. It will be interpreted here first as the garden of infancy, when all of our needs are cared for, and subsequently as the garden of adult pleasure. But as will be seen, the consequences aren't always just rolling in clover. On the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, no plant of the field was yet in the earth, for the Lord God had not yet caused it to rain. The dry earth is large and central, with the heavens surrounding it. This can also be seen as creation itself, with the heavens now being universes projected out of the mind of God. But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. The beginnings of life are moist and shrouded in mist. Then the Lord God formed Adam of mud from the ground. Earth and water are given shape in a womb-like space. Adam is the Hebrew word for human, and the closely related word, Adamah, means the ground. And we have a similar connection in English between human and humus. And God breathed into its nostrils the breath of life. The miracle of life is added to earth and water. So here we have a figure coming up out of the earth and drawing its first breath, like an infant being born. And the human became a living being. So here is the human outside the womb, breathing on its own. A new life at its dawn. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east. The east is where the sun rises. A day begins, a life begins. So here at the center we see a sun, and between its projecting rays, a beginning garden. There God put the human, whom God had formed. So here we see a human being placed down by an overarching figure representing a parental, celestial God. And out of the ground the Lord God made to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. This is the garden of infancy at what might be called the vegetative stage of development. The baby just lies there, and everything it does is unconscious reflex. And God made the tree of life also in the middle of the garden. and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. This initial attempt to illustrate these trees shows the tree of life in the positive and the tree of knowledge in the negative, as though it were a copy of positive reality. But this, I think, is a more accurate interpretation of the tree of life as the womb. Here, the tree suggests a pregnant woman containing the miraculous star of new life, reflected up from the central star of God's creative power. And this is a reinterpretation of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil as the gut, here hidden in the mother tree. At the top of the tree is uneaten food, good. At the bottom of the tree is excrement, evil. These, then, are the prototypes for what is good and what is bad. The Hebrew word translated here as evil has a primary meaning to destroy by fragmentation, which is precisely what we do to food when we eat it. The two trees in the middle of the garden do not appear to be very similar as illustrated here. But in fact, they are really just two aspects of one tree, the mother, whose womb and gut are closely aligned. The only plants mentioned in the Garden of Eden are trees. But here we have some milkweed, pretty much just for its name, though its pods are somewhat cradle-like. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden. So here we see water flowing in from the periphery, nourishing the garden. It is Mother, of course, who is the primary provider of this nourishment. There, it divided into 4 rivers. Here, the rivers are forming a cross, on which perhaps the life of one generation is being sacrificed for the well-being of the next. These 4 rivers coming out of the garden may symbolize responses coming from the infant, or the directions a person may take when leaving the garden. The first river is Pishon. It flows around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. No one knows where Pishon and Havilah are, but the infant's digested milk may come out gold in color. Might this foretell future wealth in gold and precious stones? The second river is Gihon. It flows around the whole land of Cush. We know where Cush is, south of Egypt, where it is hot and dry, a desert place, suggesting sickness and portending poverty. The third river is Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. The word Assyria means happy, but the Assyrians were feared for their military prowess. From an infant, this could be a happy outburst or a scream, pointing perhaps to a great career in politics or the military. The fourth river is Euphrates. The Euphrates was the source for fruitful agriculture and an avenue for commerce in the ancient Near East. This place of plenty implies a thriving child with fabulous futures in business and farming. The Lord God put the human in the Garden of Eden to till it and keep it. The only tilling that the infant does in the garden is to nurse. But as illustrated here, it's a farmer. And subsequent illustrations will continue this more literal interpretation. And the Lord God commanded the human, "You may eat freely of every tree in the garden." The staves are being dropped to pick the fruit. The outstretched arms can also make the downcast eyes of a face, whose sucking mouth is at the center of the snowflake. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for on the day you eat of it you shall die. So here's the human dead at the bottom of the tree. This commandment lays the groundwork for what happens later, and was perhaps precipitated by baby's voracious sucking. But in the garden of infancy, whatever is done is entirely a parental prerogative. And we will subsequently learn that transgression does not result in immediate death, only a dying to what one was and becoming something new. And here's the same story with the reinterpretation of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, focusing on the gut, the serpent in the belly. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good that the human should be alone." In this early vegetative stage of infancy, everything is one. But that is now to change. What follows is a gradual differentiation of reality into its parts. And the Lord God said, "I will make a helper fit for the human." So here is God's brainstorm, with flashes of lightning and multiple animals emerging. So out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air. So here we have all kinds of animals and birds coming up into the daylight. But what is this all about? Well, animals and birds, unlike plants, are characterized by being able to move about. So what is happening is that the infant is beginning to notice movements. And God brought them to the human to see what they would be called. So here they are, presenting themselves, a veritable zoo of different animals, with an eagle at the top, then an elephant, a lion, and so on. You're probably going to have to push the pause button if you want to see all of them. And don't forget the mice down at the center. And whatever the human called every living creature, that was its name. So here's the human calling out the names of the animals. And what is this about? The naming of the animals. Well, it's a peculiar thing about language, that when we have a name for something, we feel we know it. We have a handle on it. So this symbolizes the infant's taking possession of what moves in its world, parts of its own body, and to some extent, mother's body too. But there was not found a helper fit for the human. Movements are being distinguished and possessed, but none of these have yet coalesced into someone independent of the infant. But that is now to change. So the Lord God made a deep sleep to fall upon the human. Here is the transformative hypnotic swoon. Then the Lord God took one of the ribs from the human and made it into a woman. This is the magical moment when the infant on the mother's breast, rib to rib, feels the movements of mother's body as independent from its own. Thus, out of baby's rib, mother emerges into awareness. And this happens with little girls as well as little boys. Then the human said, "Here at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh." As illustrated here, a grown-up couple looks into each other's eyes and sees that they belong to each other. For a mother with an infant, this is when my baby smiles at me. Therefore, a man leaves his father and mother. Here, the Hebrew word specifically for a male is used for the first time. So here he is at the dawn of his maturity, reflected up from his parents below, heading out. Leaves his father and mother and cleaves to his woman, and they become one flesh. So here they are at the zenith of their physical maturity, superimposed on one another, united as one flesh. And what this is saying is that the prototype for adult union of the sexes, at least for males, is the union of mother and infant in the garden of infancy. And the human and his woman were both naked and unashamed. The expression his woman is frequently translated as his wife. But there is no separate word in Hebrew for wife, and his woman may also mean a mother for a child. And this lack of shame with nakedness certainly applies in the garden of infancy, but maybe not always in the garden of adult pleasure, as we shall find out in the story that follows. Now the serpent was more subtle than any other creature which the Lord God had made. Here we have many animals forming the face of the woman: eagle eyes, sheep mouth, serpents winding their way up, forming the margins of her face, and becoming positive serpents above, as her gut feelings reach her subtle hidden brain. And that message is as loud as the roar of a lion, shown in her forehead. The serpent said to the woman, "Did God say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" Here we have a vision of the tree above the woman's head, with serpents coming out of it, psst, speaking to her. The woman answered, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, nor shall you touch it, lest you die.'" Here the tree is identified as being simply in the middle of the garden, and a prohibition against touch is added to that of taste. The serpent said to the woman, "You will not die, for God knows when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Here the serpents have crawled right up into her brain, which with its convolutions was already rather serpentine. The story that follows of eating the forbidden fruit and its consequences is mainly about the garden of adult pleasure. But underlying it is what happens in the garden of infancy, which is basically the story of weaning. The serpent in the belly comes up telling the woman to eat. This to be accomplished by her likewise rather serpentine arms. Thus mother brings food to her mouth, showing the infant that it is good to eat. And then she brings the food to the infant's mouth. Though this could apply to the weaning of a little girl, the recipient in the story is identified specifically as male. Mother's head is imprinted over his heart, and the food is seen to come from the top of the tree, part of Mother. But weaning also implies denial of the breast. And the infant's eyes are opened. Where's Mama? And this is particularly traumatic if the weaning is precipitous, as it probably was for little boys in biblical times. What he misses is the close contact with Mother's body, which enveloped and clothed him in embrace while nursing. Now he feels emotionally naked, but he still doesn't know he's physically naked. He has to be taught to put on clothing. And now he must learn to stand apart like a little tree himself. And there comes the knowledge of what food becomes at the bottom of the tree. But even that he must learn not to touch or taste. But in adolescence, everything changes with the arrival of a new appetite, the satisfaction of which results in a fall from innocence. And this, at least in the past, was thought to have even cosmic consequences. So here in this picture, we see the man and the woman in the center of not just a garden, but a cosmic order forming the face of a paternal God crowned by the stars. The waters above the earth sweep down and around to form the margins of his face, ending with the waters below. His closed mouth is a serpent, and his eyes are the fruit, which the couple grasps. That fruit has come from the tree above, the ultimate source of all knowledge and creative power, the mind of God. The plants, like tears, are splattered on his cheeks. God knows what is about to happen. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and would make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And the point here is that she has to turn herself upside down, at least psychologically, to get to the tree. Just as in the weaning of the infant, the woman takes the lead here. Though it was the serpent in yet another of his many guises not shown here who turned her around. And she also gave some to her man, and he ate. It doesn't say they both ate at the same time, but that seems to be what is happening here. Everything has been turned upside down and multiplied into an orgy of forbidden touching and tasting. The tree for each is the other. But in the garden of pleasure, everything again becomes one. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew they were naked. So here they are, embarrassed and trying to cover themselves. If as grown-ups they had long ago learned to wear clothes and then undressed to get to the forbidden fruit, when it's over, their eyes are opened and they are acutely aware of being naked. And not just physically naked. Their most private passions have also been exposed. Maybe no one else saw, but the eye of God is at the very center. So they sewed fig leaves together to make themselves aprons. So here they are, putting on their little aprons to cover themselves. And it looks as though their hands could be crossing over to help each other out. But why the fig leaves? What happened to the clothes they were wearing? Have they just been renamed? The only thing you really need to know about the fig leaves is they tend to obscure the figs. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. The ominous sound of the Lord God is descending upon them, with evidence of their transgression in fragments of fruit at their feet. This part of the story begs for an anthropomorphic interpretation of God as a jealous patriarch just come home to find the toddler crying for mama or the adolescent caught in compromising circumstances. In either case, their position is as precarious as if they were standing on an enormous golf ball which is about to be whacked out from under them. And Adam and his woman hid themselves from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. Here the text returns to the word Adam, which in the Garden of Infancy we translated as human, because there the story could apply to little girls as well as little boys. From here on, the word Adam will be retained, meaning primarily males. In any case, they have disguised themselves pretty well, I think, as tree trunks. The Lord God called to Adam, "Where are you?" And Adam said, "I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." He said, "Who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree of which I commanded you not to eat?" So here at the top, we have the cosmic face of God, facing down the culprits in the center, covering their mouths with their hands. Then Adam said, "The woman whom you gave to me gave me the fruit of the tree, and I ate." The woman said, "The serpent beguiled me, and I ate." So here's the primal moment when blame is born, and is shown here being passed down from top to bottom. And if the serpent is now identified as male, the blame returns to the top, to be recycled again and again. The Lord God said to the serpent, "Cursed are you above all cattle and wild beasts. Upon your belly you shall go, and dust you shall eat all your days." So here the serpent, with all its many manifestations related to the body's appetites, becomes disconnected from the rest of the body and is cast upon the ground like excrement, the very embodiment of evil. I will put enmity between you and the woman. This looks like the enmity is between the woman and her own gut. But if the serpent is now male, this could be the beginning of the battle between the sexes. Then again, sometimes a snake is just a snake. And I will put enmity between your seed and her seed. So this enmity is between the serpent and all humans, generation after generation after generation. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Thus our bodily appetites are bruised and even crushed and eliminated when they are satisfied. But that subtle serpent of our desires always seems to crawl back and gets underfoot until we can't help but step on it, then stamp on it, kill it once again. To the woman, God said, "I will greatly magnify your pressure and your pregnancy." Here, with outstretched arms, the woman shares her time of trial with her sisters to either side. And together they make the circle of the earth, out of which comes new life. In pain you shall give birth to children. Here the pain is being shown by the tearing of hair and the waving of arms, as baby is born at the center. Yet your desire shall be for your man, and he shall rule over you. A woman who becomes a mother goes to the center, because she is the center from which all humans come. And here her man is projected above and out of her own head. And for the third and last time, the Hebrew word for man is specifically that of a male. To Adam, the Lord God said, "Cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all of your days. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth to you." Adam is of the ground, and Adam is cursed. So the ground is cursed and must be attacked to yield sustenance. Grown-up humans must labor to live, and this at times yields thorns and thistles. But even thorns and thistles may be beautiful, and this one turns out to be just a teasel. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. A pause in the work to eat with skeletons in the ground below. The living and dead reflect each other in the cycles of nature. Adam comes from Adamah and shall return to Adamah. Humans come from humus and shall return to humus. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. And so a stand is made against onrushing time, with the shadow of death ever underfoot. Adam called his woman's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Every woman who becomes a mother, or perhaps just a potential mother, becomes an Eve. And here, after all that has happened, she is named for the first time. And the Lord God made for Adam and his woman coats of skins and clothed them. The Hebrew word translated here as skins means naked skins and comes from a root word meaning to make bare. Might it be that this is not really about physical clothing? That it is really saying couples become clothed with each other's skin with intimate contact? Thus baby is imprinted as human by mother, and she as a mother by baby. Likewise, man and woman are marked as belonging to each other. And this mark of intimacy shows through from the heart, even when physically clothed. Then the Lord God said, Behold, Adam has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. What if he should take of the tree of life and live forever? So here is Adam reaching for the tree of life, by which a kind of immortality might be had by having children. The imprint of mother shines through from his heart. But if Eve is in fact his mother, this is a major prohibition indeed. Therefore, the Lord God sent Adam forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. In spite of all the great artwork to the contrary, there is no mention in the Bible of Eve leaving the garden, because Eve is the garden or what the garden becomes with separation. At the east of the Garden of Eden, God placed the cherubim and a flaming sword which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. The tree of life is large and central. It is the womb, the center from which we all come. And the flaming sword represents patriarchal authority guarding against access. The cherubim represent parental authority, pushing the young Adam out into the world. As Adam matures, males obtain the flaming sword, authority for access, and females become the tree of life. And so, out into the bittersweet world, with the Garden of Eden, a dream.